My name is Helen Marshall, and at 78 years old, I've lived long enough to know that life rarely warns you before it changes. I've spent my entire life in North Carolina, just outside Rocky Mount, in a house my parents bought back in 1954. It still creaks in all the same places. The porch swing still groans when the wind pushes it. The pine trees still sway like old neighbors, whispering the same stories they've whispered for decades. Everything around me has aged, but gently, the way old things are meant to. For 12 years, ever since my husband Ray passed away, this farmhouse has belonged to just me. I still talk to him sometimes, especially in the quiet mornings when the world hasn't decided who it wants to be yet. I tell him about the garden, how the tomatoes did well this year, how the hydrangeas bloomed early, how the deer keep trying to eat my sweet potatoes. I tell him about the kids, too, though there isn't much to report. They call sometimes, holidays mostly. They send cards written with love, but not with presents. Loneliness is funny. It doesn't shout, it settles. It becomes the extra chair at the table, the hollow sound in the hallway, the reason you leave the TV on, even when you're not watching it. But I've always been strong. I drive, I shop, I take care of the house, the yard, the bills. I do my crossword puzzles every morning to keep my mind sharp. People like to assume that age strips you of capability, but age only strips away what you stop practicing, and I never stopped practicing life. But on a Tuesday in July, the world decided to remind me that even strong women can stumble. The heat was already thick that morning, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the grass. I stepped out onto the porch to refill the bird feeder. Just a normal chore, something I had done hundreds of times. But halfway across the porch, a pressure began to bloom in my chest. Slow at first, almost gently, like someone was pressing a warm hand against me. Then it tightened, hardened, spread upward into my throat. I told myself it was nothing. That's what we do, isn't it? Especially women my age. We shake off warning signs until they refuse to be ignored. I took another step, then another, and suddenly the porch railing rushed toward me. My knees buckled, the world tilted, the sky spun sideways. Everything blurred together in streaks of white and green. I heard myself gasp, sharp, surprised, and then the world blinked out. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't on my porch. I was on a stretcher, rolling. Lights above me flashed by. The smell of antiseptic filled my nose. A mask covered my face, and 2 paramedics hovered over me. "Ma'am? Helen? Stay with us." I tried to speak, but the words tangled somewhere between my mind and my mouth. "You're having heart irregularities," one of them said gently. "We're taking you to Pine Ridge Medical Center." If you live around Rocky Mount, you know Pine Ridge. The small hospital with old equipment, the one that never has enough staff, the one people jokingly call your last resort. But I was in no position to argue. My chest felt heavy, my vision kept fading at the edges, and every breath seemed borrowed. I remember flashes, but my body didn't respond. A fog rushed through me like warm water, swallowing my strength. I felt fingers wrap around my wrist, felt something firm pressed against my index finger. A scanner. Biometric. Why? Why did they need my fingerprint? I managed a faint whisper. "No, wait." Nobody heard me, or maybe they did and didn't care. "Hold her steady," someone said. "There, got it. Run it through billing and admin. She won't remember a thing." The edges of the room dissolved. My limbs grew heavy. My thoughts drifted away as the sedation pulled me under. The last thing I heard was someone saying, almost casually, "She won't know the difference." But I did know. I knew enough, even half-conscious, to understand the tone of a lie. I knew enough to understand that something wrong was happening, and even if the details slipped through my fingers like sand, the feeling stayed. When I woke again, the room was quiet, dim. A soft beep pulsed beside me. My mouth was dry, and my finger, the very one they had scanned, throbbed like it had been pressed too hard. For a few seconds, I wasn't sure if everything I remembered was real or just some nightmare stitched together by fear and medication. Then I heard voices in the hallway. "Run it with her biometrics. Insurance approved everything. She signed." She didn't sign. They used her print. Same thing. It'll pass audit. A chill climbed slowly through my spine. They had used my fingerprint. Without my consent,
while I was sedated. For what? Unauthorized procedures? Billing? Paperwork? Something worse? I didn't know yet, but I knew this. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I was old, confused, easy to manipulate. But my mind, though groggy, was waking. And even though my body felt weak, something inside me hardened. Something quiet, something ancient, something that had carried me through every storm in my life. I wasn't just a patient. I wasn't just an elderly woman. I wasn't someone they could push aside. They had used my fingerprint, but they were going to learn something very important about women like me. We may bend, we may stumble,
but we do not break. And I was going to use the law in ways they never expected. The hours after I woke were a haze, slow, thick, and strangely hollow, as if the sedation still clung to the edges of my mind. I lay in the hospital bed listening to the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor beside me. My chest still felt tight, but not as tight as the weight sitting deeper, somewhere under my ribs, the knowledge that something had been done to me without my permission. I turned my head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in my neck. A tray of papers sat on a counter across the room, not neatly stacked but scattered, as if someone had shuffled through them in a hurry. A pen lay beside them, uncapped. A fingerprint pad sat just inches away. It was red, electronic, activated. My fingerprint, my authorization, my name on documents I had never seen. The realization rushed through me in pieces, like a photograph developing slowly in darkroom chemicals. I remembered the pressure on my finger, the cold surface of the scanner, the voices. She won't remember. She's old. The sedation. The assumption that I wouldn't understand. The belief that women my age don't fight back. I pushed myself upright, gripping the rail as dizziness washed through me. A nurse walked in, young, polite, her eyes darting between the monitor and the chart in her hands. "Oh, Mrs. Marshall, you're awake. How are you feeling?" "Confused," I said, "and sore." She nodded sympathetically. "That's normal after sedation." I studied her carefully. She seemed new, overwhelmed, maybe even a little frightened herself. Someone who followed orders, not someone who gave them. "Could you tell me what procedures were done?" I asked gently. She froze for just half a second, but long enough for me to see the wariness in her eyes. "Everything is in your chart," she said, "but the doctor will explain more when he rounds." I tilted my head slightly, not accusing, just observing. "I never signed anything." She hesitated again. Another half-second break. A half-second truth. "Well, your consent was recorded." "Recorded how?" Her lips parted. She inhaled. She exhaled. Her eyes flickered toward the fingerprint scanner across the room. A silent confession. "That wasn't me," I said quietly. Her throat bobbed. "Mrs. Marshall, I can't speak on that." Which meant everything. "Could you hand me my file?" I asked softly. She stepped backward. "I'm not authorized to do that." Of course she wasn't. But I didn't need her authorization. I needed information. Truth. And the truth leaks even when people try desperately to contain it. "Could you at least tell me what time I was sedated?" I pressed gently. She glanced down at the chart, then back to me. "At 10:14 a.m. And my vitals?" "Stable, responsive, alert before sedation." Alert, responsive, coherent. Sedated anyway. A tremor of anger moved through me. Not loud or reckless, but quiet, restrained, controlled. The kind of anger that sharpens, not shatters. The nurse left soon after, but before the door closed, she paused and lowered her voice so only I could hear her. "You should talk to patient relations soon." Not advice, a warning. When she left, I let her words settle like dust on the floor. Then I turned to the paper stack on the counter again. Even from across the room, I could see the forms, pages with highlighted lines, places marked for initials and signatures. And there, at the bottom of the top document, a square showing a digital fingerprint. Mine. Except I never gave it willingly. I swung my legs over the bed, letting my feet touch the cold tile. My body protested, every joint stiff, every muscle slow, but I forced myself upright. The world wobbled for a moment, but the resolve inside me stayed steady. I crossed the room. The papers were a chaotic mess, and at the center of the pile was a page stamped urgent authorization. Procedures I didn't recognize, tests I never approved, charges totaling thousands of dollars, and next to each one, a digital checkmark marking my consent. My fingerprint on every page. My chest tightened, not from fear now, but from something fiercer. They thought I was too old to understand, too tired to argue, too weak to fight. But they didn't know the truth about women like me. We have survived things far worse than bureaucracy and corruption. We have carried families on our backs, buried husbands, endured illnesses, stood alone when we had to, and we learned with every year that carved lines into our skin how to recognize deceit. Voices echoed faintly in the hallway, low, urgent whispers drifting toward my room. I leaned closer to the door, letting the words slip through the crack. Did you finish the paperwork for the Marshall woman? Yes, the fingerprint authorized everything. And she hasn't questioned it? She just woke up. We'll handle it before discharge. Good, as long as she doesn't dig. Dig. The word rang through me like a church bell. Not understand, not agree, not ask. Dig. Meaning they had something to hide. Meaning they knew exactly what they had done. Meaning they assumed I wouldn't press further. But they were wrong. I stepped back from the door and returned to the bed, not to lie down, but to sit, to think, to gather the armor age had forged inside me. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, and as I looked out the small square window at the wide North Carolina sky, a clarity settled over me. They had used my fingerprint, and that one mistake, they thought it was clever, practical, efficient, would become the very thing that unraveled everything they had done. Because fingerprints aren't just a tool for fraud, they are evidence, and evidence speaks louder than assumptions.
The doctor entered the room a few minutes later, tall, confident, wearing the kind of expression men wear when they underestimate the person sitting in front of them. "Well, Mrs. Marshall," he said cheerfully, too cheerfully, "looks like you gave us quite a scare." I looked him in the eyes, calm and steady. "Doctor," I said softly, "we need to discuss what happened while I was unconscious." He blinked, surprised by the directness in my tone. "We'll go over everything," he assured quickly. "You consented to the necessary procedures." I tilted my head. "Did I now?" He hesitated, a crack in his composure. "Yes, your fingerprint verified everything." There it was, the sentence that sealed his fate. I smiled, small, polite, deadly. "Doctor," I said, voice level and quiet, "I'm sure you know that using biometric data from an incapacitated patient is illegal in the state of North Carolina." A flicker of alarm flashed across his face. Because he knew, because they all knew, because they had counted on me not knowing. And that was the moment something shifted. Not in the room, not between us, inside me. A fire sparked, a decision formed, and a plan began to weave itself, slow, certain, unstoppable. If they were willing to use my fingerprint without consent, then I was willing to use the law without mercy. And this time, they were the ones who wouldn't see it coming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't act confused or overwhelmed the way they expected a 76-year-old woman to behave. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and let silence settle heavily between us, the kind of silence that forces the truth up to the surface. The doctor shifted uneasily. He tried to disguise it behind a professional smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched, betraying him. Older women know that twitch. We've seen it on sons who got caught lying, on husbands who hid bad news, on coworkers who underestimated us. It's the twitch of a man realizing control is slipping through his fingers. "Mrs. Marshall," he finally began, "I assure you everything was done according to protocol." I raised an eyebrow, just slightly, but enough to make him hesitate. "Then you won't mind," I replied calmly, "bringing me everything I supposedly authorized. Every form, every timestamp, every digital record." He opened his mouth, closed it, then cleared his throat. "That's not standard procedure." "It is now," I answered. He straightened his lab coat, trying to gather his authority like a shield. "This hospital handles thousands of records daily. It's not practical to." "I'm not asking for thousands," I said softly. "I'm asking for mine." His silence spoke louder than any refusal. He murmured something about checking with administration and hurried out of the room. I watched him go, my pulse steady. Not triumphant, not angry, just certain. There comes a point in every woman's life when she stops asking permission to defend herself.
I had reached that point. Minutes passed, then more. Nurses walked by. Carts rolled down the hall. The world continued as if nothing had happened, as if I were just another elderly patient recovering quietly. But inside me, something had shifted sharply, permanently. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't the doctor who returned. It was a woman, mid-50s, composed, with a clipboard tucked under her arm and careful eyes that revealed she'd been briefed. "Mrs. Marshall," she said smoothly, "I'm from patient advocacy." So they sent someone from the department meant to manage risk. Good. I sat a little taller. "Please, come in." She closed the door behind her and approached my bed with a soothing smile. "I understand you have some concerns about your consent forms." "I don't have concerns," I corrected. "I have facts." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "We take these matters very seriously. If something was done improperly, something was," I said. "You know it, and I know it, so we can speak plainly." She lowered herself into the chair beside my bed, crossing one leg over the other. "What exactly is it you're alleging?" "That I was sedated without clear explanation, that my fingerprint was used to authorize procedures I never agreed to, that staff openly discussed my age as justification for bypassing legal consent." Her pen paused halfway down the page. "Do you have proof of this?" she asked. I watched her carefully, not because I doubted her intentions, but because older women learn to read people the way other folks read instruction manuals. Her tone wasn't dismissive. It was cautious. She needed my answer to decide how deep this would go. "Yes," I nodded. "I have proof." Her eyebrows lifted. "Where?" "In your hallway," I said simply. "Your staff spoke loud enough for me to hear everything through the door." She exhaled slowly. That was not the answer she'd hoped for. She wanted uncertainty. She wanted hesitation. She wanted vulnerability. Instead, she got clarity. "I see," she said. "Well, we'll need to verify exactly what documents were authorized." "By all means," I replied. "Bring them." She blinked. She hadn't expected me to say it so confidently. Before she could answer, another voice drifted into the room, a voice I knew too well. "Mom?" I didn't turn immediately. I closed my eyes for half a second, preparing myself. My daughter Melanie stood in the doorway, hair pulled back in a rushed bun, coat half-zipped, worry carved in the corners of her mouth. But underneath the worry was something else, something sharper, something familiar. Annoyance. She rushed toward the bed. "What happened? You scared me. I got a call saying you were demanding legal documents? Mom, what is going on?" I kept my voice calm. "I'm handling it." "Handling it?" She looked at the patient advocate as if I were embarrassing her. "She gets confused when she's stressed," Melanie explained quickly. "Just ignore whatever she said." The patient advocate turned to me, startled by my daughter's words. Confused. The favorite weapon used against older women. A word sharp enough to erase credibility. A word used to silence. "No," I said, my tone firm enough to stop both women mid-breath. "I am not confused, and I don't appreciate being spoken over." Melanie blinked, thrown off. "Mom." "Sit," I said quietly. And she did. It surprised us both. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to keep the peace. I wasn't softening myself to avoid conflict. I wasn't letting someone else rewrite my reality. I looked at the patient advocate again. "You brought someone into this discussion without my permission. Let's continue." The advocate straightened, understanding now that I wasn't fragile, just underestimated. "Very well," she said. "I'll retrieve your records." As she left the room, Melanie leaned forward, whispering harshly, "Mom, what are you doing? You're making a scene. They're trying to help you." I turned my head slowly and met her eyes. "Melanie, do you know what they did?" "What?" "They used my fingerprint while I was unconscious." She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, her face shifted, shock first, then disbelief, then fear. Are you sure?" "Yes. But why would they—" "For the same reason you just dismissed me in front of a stranger," I said softly. "Because when a woman reaches a certain age, people decide her voice weighs less than everyone else's." She swallowed hard. The patient advocate returned minutes later with a thick file, too thick. I didn't need to open it to know half of what was inside wasn't mine. "We pulled everything you signed in the last 48 hours, she said. I held her gaze. "Let's start with the timestamps." When she flipped the first page toward me, the truth shone brighter than any accusation I could have made. A fingerprint record at 10:17 a.m. Sedation notes at 10:14 a.m.
3 minutes apart, meaning the consent was taken after I was unconscious. I didn't need to say anything. The patient advocate's lips pressed into a thin line. Melanie's hand flew to her mouth. There it was. The truth. They expected confusion. They expected compliance. They expected silence. Instead, they found evidence. And this was just the beginning. Because a woman with clarity is a dangerous thing. But a woman with proof, she is unstoppable. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The room felt heavy, as if the truth itself had weight, pressing down on every surface, every breath, every unspoken thought. The patient advocate stared at the document with a kind of stunned professionalism. She wasn't surprised that a mistake had been made, but she was surprised at how blatant it was. Melanie, sitting stiffly in the chair beside my bed, looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide and unsure. That uncertainty wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Recognition that her mother was not fragile.
That her mother did not imagine things, that her mother had been right. The advocate cleared her throat softly. Mrs. Marshall, this timestamp alone invalidates the consent. Of course it does, I answered. She nodded and flipped through the rest of the file, her brow creasing deeper with each page she turned. The papers rustled like dry leaves, small, brittle things crumbling under the weight of something bigger than they could carry. Then she froze entirely. A second fingerprint authorization. Time-stamped after I had been fully sedated. Time-stamped at a moment when my pulse was monitored, my oxygen level recorded, and my consciousness documented as non-responsive. Her eyes lifted toward me, then toward Melanie, then back to the page. This, she whispered, this is serious. I exhaled slowly. Not triumphantly, just knowingly. Women my age rarely get the satisfaction of having our instincts validated so clearly. We're used to being told we misheard, misunderstood, or misremembered. We're used to being encouraged to let things go, to trust the professionals, to calm down. But there was nothing calm about what had been done to me. Where do we go from here? I asked, my voice steady. She straightened the papers and closed the folder, her movements suddenly reverent, almost careful. Mrs. Marshall, we need to escalate this immediately. This is not a clerical error. This is a breach of protocol, potentially criminal. Melanie's hand reached for mine. Not hesitantly, not cautiously, instinctively. Mom, I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I squeezed her hand. I know you didn't. The patient advocate rose from her chair, already pulling a second form from her clipboard. With your permission, I'd like to file a formal grievance, launch an internal audit, and notify the legal department. Do it, I said. Would you like representation? She asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes. When she left the room again, the silence returned, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of doubt, the silence of awakening. Melanie leaned back, letting out a breath she'd been holding since the moment she walked in. Mom, I said things earlier, things I shouldn't have. I made assumptions. I treated you like... She stopped herself, ashamed. Like I was fading, I offered gently. She nodded, tears gathering along her lower lashes. Yes, and I'm sorry. I placed my hand over hers. Then let this be the moment everything shifts. She nodded, wiping her cheeks, and something inside her seemed to soften, maybe for the first time in years. She wasn't speaking to me as someone who needed to be managed. She was speaking to me as her mother. But the door opened again, and whatever quiet reconciliation had begun was interrupted. This time it was the doctor. Not with confidence, not with authority, not with a hint of the superiority he displayed earlier. He looked rattled.
The kind of rattled a man becomes when he realizes the woman he underestimated is no longer sitting quietly waiting for explanations. Mrs. Marshall, he began, I understand there have been Concerns raised. I met his eyes. Concerns? That's an elegant word for forgery. He flinched. Melanie crossed her arms, suddenly very protective. My mother never authorized those procedures, and you sedated her before explaining anything fully. He tried to recover. Ma'am, medical situations can evolve quickly. Not this quickly, I said. Show me where I agreed to anything. He hesitated. Too long. And people who hesitate in the presence of truth always reveal themselves. Mrs. Marshall, he said, softening his voice, your health was at risk. We had to make quick decisions. I tilted my head. So you made the decision to treat my fingerprint like a stamp instead of consent? His jaw tightened. I continued. Or the decision to use my age as justification for bypassing legal procedure. He said nothing. And silence, his silence, told me everything. He knew exactly what they'd done. He knew exactly why they'd done it. And he knew exactly who they thought they could get away with doing it to. Mrs. Marshall, he finally murmured, perhaps we should find a resolution privately. No, I said firmly. We will resolve this lawfully. Again, he flinched. Melanie stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was fierce in a way I had never heard from her. Doctor, unless you want this hospital on the front page of every newspaper in North Carolina, you will cooperate fully. He stiffened. There's no need for threats. That wasn't a threat, she said. That was a promise. The door opened once more, and the patient advocate returned, but she wasn't alone. A legal representative entered with her, tall, stern, focused. The room shifted, almost physically. This was no longer a conversation. This was a reckoning. Mrs. Marshall, the legal representative said, stepping toward me with a folder of her own, thicker than the first one. We have reviewed your chart. We have reviewed your timestamps. We have also reviewed the hallway audio. The doctor paled. Hallway audio. They recorded everything. Everything he thought would stay whispered. The representative continued. Based on the evidence, the hospital is prepared to acknowledge significant errors in protocol. Errors? I repeated. She nodded, slowly. And negligence, and coercion, and unauthorized medical consent. Melanie gasped softly. The doctor opened his mouth as if to object, but the representative held up her hand, silencing him. Mrs. Marshall, she said, we would like to offer immediate restitution, formal apologies from staff involved, and assure you that disciplinary action will be taken. I let the words hang in the air. Restitution, apologies, discipline. But none of that mattered more than what came next.
However, she continued carefully, before we proceed, I need to ask, are you planning to pursue legal action independently? The room quieted. Melanie looked at me, wide-eyed. The doctor stared at the floor. The advocate held her breath. And I realized something simple and extraordinary. They were waiting for my decision. They were acknowledging my authority. They were recognizing my voice. Finally, I lifted my chin and spoke clearly. Yes, I am. The representative nodded, almost respectfully. Then the hospital will cooperate fully. The doctor closed his eyes, defeated. Melanie squeezed my hand, and I felt something inside me bloom. Not anger, not vengeance. Power. The quiet, mature kind of power that comes from knowing the world underestimated you, and you proved it wrong simply by being who you are. But this wasn't the end. This was the moment the story shifted. They used my fingerprint. Now I would use the law. And I was just getting started. In the days that followed, everything moved with an odd mixture of speed and slowness. At times, the world felt like it was racing ahead. Phone calls, meetings, documents, long conversations with lawyers whose voices carried both outrage and strategy. Other times it felt as though time had thickened, stretching moments into something heavier, more reflective, as I sat alone in my hospital bed absorbing the reality of everything that had happened. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was awake. Awake in a way I hadn't been in years, maybe decades. It's remarkable how long a woman can go without her voice being truly heard, until the day she finally remembers she has one. Melanie visited every morning now, not to question me, not to check on me, but to support me, to stand beside me, to listen. Her voice softened, her tone shifted. She watched me with a new kind of attentiveness, as though she were seeing me clearly for the first time since she was a little girl watching her mother tie her shoes. One afternoon, while sunlight cast pale rectangles across the hospital floor, she asked quietly, "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? About how people talked to you, about how they treated you?" I took a slow breath, because I didn't think you'd believe me. Her eyes filled instantly, not with guilt, but with a kind of sorrow that comes from realization. "But I do now," she whispered, "and I will always believe you from now on." There was no anger in her voice, only devotion, something tender and renewed, something I thought I might never feel again.
The legal process continued swiftly. It had to. Too many eyes were now watching. The advocate kept me informed. The attorney visited twice a day. The hospital administrator stayed painfully wary, tiptoeing around their explanations. And the doctor, well, he barely spoke at all. But the most important moment came 3 days after everything began, when they asked me to give an official statement.
It wasn't a statement for internal records. It wasn't a statement meant to clarify confusion. It was testimony. A woman sat across from me, someone from the Board of Medical Oversight. Older than the lawyers, younger than the administrators. Sharp eyes, firm posture, a recorder on the table between us. "Mrs. Marshall," she said, "please describe in your own words what happened the moment you realized your fingerprint had been taken." In that instant, something settled inside me, a kind of stillness, the kind a courtroom gets right before a verdict. I folded my hands and spoke calmly, clearly, measured. I told her everything. Not dramatically, not emotionally, though emotion pulsed beneath every word, but with the resolute clarity of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. When I finished, the room felt different, filled, heavier, bearing witness. The investigator nodded slowly. "Mrs. Marshall, I want to thank you. Most patients never speak up. Many never even realize what's been done to them. You may have prevented this from happening to someone far more vulnerable." I nodded, but I didn't respond right away. Vulnerability is a strange word. It makes people imagine fragility, but I have never been fragile. Women my age aren't fragile. We are simply expected to be silent. There's a difference. Later that evening, Melanie and I sat together in the hospital's quiet lounge. The walls were painted a muted green, the kind meant to look soothing, but instead felt like waiting. Outside the window, the sun dipped behind the pine trees, painting the sky with strokes of orange and coral. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think getting older meant becoming smaller, less capable, but that's not what I see in you." I looked at her, surprised by the earnestness in her voice. She continued, "I see someone who survived every kind of hardship, someone who doesn't back down, someone who uses truth as her weapon." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Where do you think you got your spine from?" I asked gently. She laughed, wiping tears away with the back of her hand. When the hospital finally discharged me, the legal process was far from over. Investigations were underway. The doctor was already on administrative leave. Several staff members were under review. The biometric authorization system had been temporarily disabled pending state audit. A storm had begun, and it wasn't going to quiet anytime soon. But as I sat in the wheelchair, waiting for the nurse to bring the discharge papers, I felt something unexpected. Peace. True peace. The kind that settles inside you like warm light. The nurse wheeled me toward the front entrance. Outside, the world felt crisp and new, as though the air itself had changed. Melanie helped me into her car, and as she closed the door, she paused. "You really scared them," she said, with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. I smiled. "Good." She laughed, shaking her head.
"You know, when they said you wouldn't remember any of this, I think they forgot who they were dealing with." As we pulled away from the hospital, I looked back just once. Not with bitterness, not with fear, with certainty. They had used my fingerprint without permission. They had tried to silence me with sedation. They had counted on age to make me blind. They had counted on confusion, on vulnerability, on weakness. But they had miscalculated something essential. There is nothing more dangerous than an elderly woman who still remembers her worth. In the weeks that followed, the investigation widened. The hospital issued public statements. The legal case began drafting its formal claims. Journalists reached out to my lawyer. Patient advocacy groups contacted me. My quiet farmhouse became the center of something larger, something important. But life didn't feel overwhelming. It felt purposeful. And one morning, as I watched birds gather on the feeder I'd been trying to refill the day everything started, I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't just my story. It was the story of countless older women who were underestimated, dismissed, talked over, taken advantage of. Women who were told they were forgetful when they were actually perceptive. Women who were told they were confused when they were actually being manipulated.
women who were told they were fragile when they were anything but. My story was their story, and by telling it loudly, truthfully, I was giving them something many didn't realize they could have. A voice that didn't fade with age, a name that couldn't be erased by bureaucracy, a strength that couldn't be sedated. If you're listening to this, wherever you are, if someone has used your age as a weapon against you, if someone has dismissed your clarity, your intelligence, your instincts, if someone has made you feel powerless, hear me clearly. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. You are not done. Stand tall. Speak boldly. Use every weapon you have, your memory, your history, your resilience, your truth. They used my fingerprint, but I used the law. And in the end, the law remembered me. It saw me. It validated me. And it protected me. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or the strength of someone you love, leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. And if you want more true stories of justice, survival, and the fierce power of women who refuse to disappear, subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting for you. And perhaps one day, one of them will be yours.